It's a very big thank you to yourself, Sanda, and excellent moderation. And of course, as we were all following that conversation, really inspiring as we're listening into some of those very practical ways in which business leaders are responding to the call to lead in turbulent times. And of course, if anyone is further interested in how their business can support the humanitarian relief for the Ukraine, we are going to be putting up those details in the chat with a link or a QR code, and also potentially on the screen a QR code might come up so that you might be able to read more about it. But do look out in the chat for that information as it comes to you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, again, from wherever you may be around the world, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here with us. We are turning our attention now to a different discussion. This discussion is really looking at the role of the private sector in accelerated action towards a just transition towards net zero. This discussion is co-hosted by the United Nations Global Compact as well as the International Labour Organization. So I'm going to be handing over to Laila Kabarsi in a moment, who is going to be leading this conversation, moderating this conversation. She is, of course, the chair of the SBTI board, as well as a senior program officer at UNGC. But before I do that, let's turn our attention now very briefly to words from the Director General of the International Labour Organization, Guy Ryder. And from there, Laila will then pick it up. Do stay engaged, stay leaning in, stay in conversation. We are absolutely loving all the inspiration that we're getting from this Leaders Summit. To Mr. Guy Ryder now.
Executive Director Sanda Ojiambo, distinguished panelists and guests, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to join you in this session on accelerating private sector action for a just transition to net zero, which the UN Global Compact and the ILO are co-hosting today. The latest report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is a compelling appeal on the urgency of tackling climate change as the greatest risk of all to people, employment and businesses across the planet. And the circumstances are challenging. The world has been on a slow, uneven and incomplete path to recovery from the devastating effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. And now we face conflict-induced crises of food, of energy and of finance. Economic systems are fragile, inflation is on the rise, and the political situation is tense, with multilateralism and international cooperation tested to the limits. But despite all of that, our collective responsibility is still to address the climate crisis now, to do more and to do it better. The economic recovery and the response to climate change cannot be sequenced or disconnected, and business has a key role to play. And I want to stress three important aspects. Firstly, ambitious, measurable and reportable action by enterprises is critical, addressing the triple dimensions of sustainable development. Business initiatives must decisively advance climate change mitigation and adaptation. The guidance from COP26 in Glasgow on market and non-market mechanisms represents a key step as it recalls the imperative of a just transition. Underlying the creation of decent work is also relevant in carbon markets. The opportunities to drive innovation, new market creation and business resilience are significant. Second, planning for and investing in a just transition is an essential enabler of ambition and a driver to a human-centred response. And private sector financing at scale and at speed is indispensable to transform energy systems, industrial processes, transport, agriculture and housing. The reskilling and redeployment of workers across industries, the development of new and green enterprises, the greening of business operations, all require innovative approaches to investment and to financing. And finally, integrated and enabling policies are indispensable, underpinned by effective social dialogue and participation. The ILO's guidelines for a just transition as a global framework endorsed by governments, employers and workers, offer a solid basis to promote and to manage a just transition. And through the Global Accelerator on Jobs and Social Protection for a Just Transition, launched by the UN Secretary-General in September last year, the think tank on just transition, and many other joint initiatives, we can and we must enhance collective action and collaboration to advance decisively and speedily towards net zero.
Thank you, Mr. Guy Ryder, for highlighting many of the challenges that we're dealing with and also outlining some important ways forward. And thank you all for joining the panel today on accelerating private sector action for a just transition to net zero. We have a great panel, and I'll be pleased to moderate the panel discussion today. A just transition puts people at the center. It involves governments, workers, employers in the planning process. It supports workers and communities that are affected by the transition, and it generates green and decent jobs. Our panelists today represent the private sector, and we will hear about their experience and how we can understand the role of business in contributing to a just transition and why it matters. We have representatives from very different sectors and regions, and although the energy sector occupies an important place in the just transition, every sector, every region is affected and has a role to play. So I'm delighted to introduce our panel. We have Mr. Roy Bagatini, your Executive Director and Group Chief Executive Officer at Woolworths Holdings in South Africa. Mr. Mark Kaye, your Chief Financial Officer at Moody's Corporation in the US. Ms. Vaishali Nigam Sinha, you're the Chair of the Renew Foundation, and also Chief Sustainability Officer at Renew Power India. And finally, Mr. Roberto Suarez Santos, you're the Secretary General of the International Organization of Employers. So let's get started. And Vaishali, I'm going to start with you. As a provider of renewable energy in India, your company is part of what we call the transition in. It refers to the expansion of the green industries. And this comes in contrast with the transition out, which refers to the phase out of high emitting sectors and industries. Can I ask you to please share a challenge in the area of just transition, a challenge that you faced, and some insights that you gained from that experience?
Sure. Thank you, first of all, for having me on this session. It's an absolute pleasure to be here amongst all of you. It's a great leadership session. Been listening to some of the conversations here. And so there have been two sorts of challenges, and I'll talk about two. One is when we started, we are about 10-year plus old or young company in this, and it gives us a lot of pleasure to be in the transition in segment. One of the problems we faced was there was no skilled workforce to recruit from when we started this company. Even though we got funded, which was the most challenging part, but to get people who understood the sector and had the experience so that we could go up and running was impossible. So that's taken a lot of effort. So that was, in terms of skilling and having folks who could contribute was a bit of a challenge in the early days. More recently, what I feel, and this is my own definition of justice or the lack of it, is that, the sector we are in and the space we are in, where we are trying to obviously contribute in a positive way to the transition, the amount of innovation and financing we see for our sector vis-a-vis the hard-to-abate sector, I don't think it's parallel. I still see financial institutions working very hard to be more innovative and creative as far as financial products are concerned for the hard to abate. And I get it that we need a balance, but I would urge for more innovation by multilaterals, financial institutions for transition in. So these are the two challenges I see in the last decade of the transition and in this coming decade. So more innovation in finance. And of course, we continue to upskill, which is the way to go. And yeah, back to you, Leela.
Well, thank you so much for those insights. I'm going to turn it over to Roy from South Africa. And we've noted that the sustainability strategy for your company covers 8 key areas of the business. And would like to know how Just Transition links to your sustainability strategy. And also, if you can tell us about any linkages with national policies, given that the South African government has given high priority to the topic of just transition. Oh, we don't hear you. Doesn't look like.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Leela. I hope you can hear me now. Thank you. Yes, yeah, certainly. I mean, sustainability for us has been a key focus, in the business for some time now. But our efforts were really, I guess, formalized through an approach that we've taken that we call our Good Business Journey. And our Good Business Journey is really a program that, for us, incorporates everything we do across all areas of sustainability. We have a vision, of course, of being one of the world's most responsible retailers. And that clearly requires us to make a profound and a really positive impact on the lives of our employees, the communities clearly that we operate in, and of course, the broader environment too. And for us, I mean, the very real and significant challenges that we face in terms of climate change, our current Good Business Journey strategies are really targeted at addressing a number of these challenges, which include things like food sourcing and security. They include things like water efficiency and biodiversity in the supply chain, as well as obviously the issues of wages and broader employee well-being. So there are a number of things that we're doing in this space that both focus on certain internal and external factors. But at the same time, I think we're very mindful of the impacts that climate change has and will continue to have on people, especially in a country like ours, which is characterized by high levels of poverty, high levels of unemployment and inequality. And so we have formulated what we call our Inclusive Justice Initiative, IJI as we call it, which is a foundational element of our Good Business Journey. And it is targeted at inspiring inclusive growth for all our people. And it really is a further, I guess, active expression of the work we're doing to contribute to social inclusion and a more just society. At a very practical level, Leela, this is about addressing issues such as racism, gender-based violence, inequality. But one of our key initiatives in this regard is what we call our Just Wage Initiative. And our approach here is really to ensure that our people receive meaningful pay for meaningful work. And we're very clear that a minimum wage is not a living wage and a living wage is not a just wage. For us, a just wage, or what we call a Woolies wage, is an aspiration. In fact, it's an obligation on us as an employer. We have to ensure that all our people can secure an appropriate quality of life and standard of living. And this approach, in fact, extends beyond our own organization. One of our Good Business Journey 2025 plus goals is to work with all our partners within the supply chain towards achieving a just wage throughout the value chain. And we're exploring various memberships like the Ethical Trading Initiative, etc., to help us along that particular journey. So, yes, I mean, I think your question in terms of government policy, national policy, this does clearly link to a number of things going on in the country. And we are seeing the South African government prioritize just transition. They've established a presidential commission to drive this process, and obviously we're engaged with that. There are a number of other similar initiatives going on across the country on a national basis. But I think it's very important, for us because, one can't walk this path alone, as we've all discovered. A broad-based, profound impact will really require all of us deliberate collaboration amongst all stakeholders. And so the approach we have taken as a business is not only to set ambitious goals for ourselves, which we do, but it is to play a role in encouraging others to collaborate across the public and private sector and to join in this cause for good. Thanks, Leila.
Very impressive. Thank you, Roy. And very comprehensive strategy and answer as well. Mark, I'm going to turn it over to you now. Part of Moody's business is to help investors and other capital market participants understand the risks that companies are exposed to. What risks related to the just transition should companies and their investors be assessing and managing? And do you consider that those risks might be underappreciated today?
Leila, thank you very much to yourself and obviously the UNGC for inviting us to participate this morning. Moody's purpose is really to empower organizations to make better decisions. And we believe that, through greater transparency, more informed decisions, and really fair access to information, that opens the door to shared progress. And as part of our purpose as a company, we've established our sustainability strategy, which is very much focused on building a better business by embedding responsible, sustainable decision-making into everything we do, and as well as supporting better lives through a forward-thinking, inclusive culture for our people and our communities, and delivering what we think of as better solutions for our customers by integrating data and analytical capabilities with our domain expertise. For example, Moody's solutions really do enable investors to incorporate climate considerations into their portfolio analyses, and thus supporting them in their transition to net zero. And clearly, a low carbon economy engenders many stakeholder benefits, including a reduction in extreme weather events driven by climate change. Accompanying this urgent need to transition to a low carbon economy is the growing focus on a just transition. And that's a key element in proactively preparing the workforce, supply chains, and communities, as well as what we think of as a necessary condition for equitable climate adaptation. And that process, in turn, demands an unprecedented transformation that poses a variety of risks, but also opportunities. And to meet that need, Moody's ESG Solutions has developed several indicators that help investors assess, from the perspective of a just transition, the companies in which they invest. And an example of these indicators could include career management and employability, promotion of social and economic development, and really a commitment to developing green products and services. Another important element, are the risks that come from exposure to physical climate hazards. There was a recent Moody's analysis on rising focus on just transition and what that means. And that report indicated that around 40% of the countries or counties in the US Appalachian region, for example, in Ohio or West Virginia, they're highly exposed to heat stress. And over 90% are highly exposed to flooding. And these risks threaten the well-being of the communities, but they can also damage and affect labor productivity and can cause property damage. And so really, to address what we think of as complex climate-related challenges faced by companies, countries, municipalities around the world, Moody's really does help provide investors with that tool set to help companies preparedness and improve their preparedness for the low carbon transition in line with our, again, purpose as a company.
That's right. Well, thanks so much, Mark, for those comments. Roberto, I'm going to turn it over to you. Given the broad regional and sectoral diversity in the employers that you represent, can you please speak to us about some of the universal challenges that businesses face on the topic of just transition? What are some of the key trends? And also in particular, what are the challenges that are faced by the smaller companies?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for inviting us. As you rightly say, our scope is big. It's more than 145 business organizations, independent organizations in almost 140 countries. The biggest challenge that we are now facing, we have been engaging and also bringing not just those who are converted, but also those local and medium companies that are not so much aware of what is at stake here. We are bringing them, and the challenge that we face is related to policy. And that has been our work already for more than I would say 10, 15 years, how we can have the right policies. It's very often the case that I give you the examples: inadequate tax policies, badly framed administrative requirements, lack of coordination among different responsible bodies at governmental level, but above all, weak institutions, huge informality is not getting them there. So even though you have an engagement which is quite growing and solid on the side not just of big companies at local level but also small and medium companies, that we need this complementary with a big push of ambition which is still not there. But also, and I'm going to insist on that, regulations right now and institutions and policies are not conducive, and that's going to be a big push for the COP27 to anticipate the needed skills. We have done intensive work with the ILO in this area, with the International Labour Organization, but also with other instances. But if we do not really do much better on how we can make a mapping of skills that are going to be needed by subsectors, but also by specific companies, I think we are going to lose many opportunities. It's not at all impossible. It's sometimes very difficult, but we can get there. Uh, I just want to remind you that the perhaps one of the remaining um obstacles that we stubbornly see in the discussions that we have on many grounds, especially in COP, is the jobs angle. I mean, 40% of all jobs globally, and that's a big figure, depend on a stable and healthy environment. And according to the ILO, we can bring 18 million more jobs with the result of achieving the Paris Agreement goal. But all those are dependent on good training, good skillings, which are still not there. If you just also consider that 40%, just 40% of all the NDCs, the national determined contributions, include a proper skills plan. So, Lila, I would very much insist on this angle of anticipating skills, especially for small and medium companies at local level, and also with a much more realistic approach in terms of the policies that are needed. Especially when you have weak institutions in developing economies, that's going to be our big push, and that's where we need all of you also to work with us.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that very important aspects to highlight for sure from your angle. Now I'm going to turn it over to all of you for one more round of comments before we conclude our panel. Quick comments from you. You're all leading organizations that are participating in the Think Lab on just transition that was recently launched by the Global Compact, the ILO, and some of our partners. I'd like to just ask you briefly, what is a core insight that you aim to bring to the conversation? And where do you think we need to have more awareness to enable meaningful business engagement on just transition? So we're going to go in the reverse order. And Roberto, over to you. Then we have Mark, Roy, and then Vaishali.
Lila, I would insist very much. First of all, don't underestimate the need for guidance, especially for medium and small companies. They are not aware of what's at stake. They are not aware of what's coming. So really a big push in a partnership mood on how we can provide them the elements to engage further. And it's not just about pledges. It's also about them committing to a different business model, which is not such an easy path. So guidance could be for me one critical element, guidance, persuasive guidance on what's at stake. Second, good partnerships on skills and educational policies to anticipate what they will be need on terms of skills shortage. And third, and without any doubt, and I am still thinking on developing economies, the access to finance, angle. And I was in Egypt already 1 month ago, and I had the opportunity to liaise with many local business. This is really far away from being there to put the transitions at the front. If we do not help them to bring the finance they need to change the model, will not get the case. Many countries are already anticipating that, but we are going really to push for that at COP27 with the help of all of you.
Thank you. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you. So climate change is the greatest risk multiplier that the world is facing. And it is more than a $45 trillion investment opportunity. As such, it's essential to understand both the multi-dimensional risks presented by the transition, but also the significant opportunity to take long-term sustainable action. And this makes it increasingly important to have a robust set of comprehensive data to make better decisions. And at Moody's, we're partnering with organizations and initiatives like the UNGC on climate to help drive systematic action and also to support the efforts towards more consistent and comparable disclosures through our unique products and solutions, our involvement with organizations like the TCFD, as well as our own sustainability reporting policies and practices. And you can see that through some of our publications, our decarbonization plans, our emissions reduction targets. And for example, maybe one last comment here, just last December, Moody's published a report on the just transition. And that was all about highlighting the need for better preparedness for the coming disruption resulting from the transition to net zero for workforces, supply chains, consumers, and communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to you, Roy.
Thank you, Leila. Yes, I think obviously being a multinational retailer, we really do have an opportunity to bring a sort of a strong modern day retail perspective across multiple categories to the Think Lab. We have extensive experiences across fashion, beauty, home, and food supply chains, and we think we'll be able to make relevant the various topics under discussion, particularly in the context that we operate. We do operate across multiple markets in the Southern Hemisphere, and I think we're in a position to share, I think, unique perspectives on the unfolding challenges of climate change insofar as it relates to environmental and social impacts in the region. And clearly, I think as a leading corporate, we have a role to play in really raising awareness, in the private sector, and in the spirit of collaboration that I was referring to earlier, really get people to work together, behind this.
Great. Thanks for that. And Vaishali, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. So I think the Think Lab on Just Transition is a great platform for all of us to come together and learn from each other. We at Renew, being the only energy company from India to be a part of this lab, we are looking forward to sharing our experiences and learnings from an emerging market country where the transition is pretty significant for the world. So as we come up with innovative solutions like round-the-clock supply of clean energy, it's pretty path-breaking. We hope we can share some of these experiences with the rest of the world and also learn from other countries in the world like Canada when they looked at their transition, the coal transition, and the processes and the approach and the councils, etc. They followed, where they brought together the government, the industry, associations to have an impactful and an effective process to take the transition forward. I look forward to opportunities at COP26 and 7 where we can get our government representatives to learn from each other. In my view, that's quite critical because they're the ones who interact and have an impact on the larger population in the country. And it's important that the communities own this transition, because when they own this transition and they understand what it means for them, can they demand what they need to get? So I think the definition of just varies from different countries around the world. Somewhere justice is about, I guess, survival, and in other places it's about equality. And I think we would love to bring these differences from our part of the world to the lab and share this and also learn from others so that we can take the journey forward. One last point I wanted to make, Leela, is that whatever we may think of the transition, it is not as steady and stable as we'd like it to be. I was at Davos recently and I was at COP26. the amount of positive commitment and energy to take the transition forward and to meet the 1.5-degree goals in November, and compared to what we are listening to now under the garb of energy security and a lot of that, there is a little bit of dawdling happening. So I'd urge all of us, the private sector and the governments who are committed, to come together and stand firm to really accelerate and push this transition forward. Otherwise, forget 1.5 degrees. I don't think even 2.5 is going to be possible. So that's my last comment I wanted to leave you all with.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, all of you, for these incredible insights and, you know, different perspectives coming from all parts of the world. And absolutely, we need to keep the 1.5 degree alive. We don't have another option, literally. So all efforts in this direction are important. We're at time for our panel, so I'm going to close the panel for today and invite Miss Sharon Borrow to deliver closing remarks. Sharon is the General Secretary of the International Trade Union Confederation, representing 20 million workers in 163 countries and territories. Over to you. Thank you all.
Greetings. Thank you for advancing the discussion, and let's hope the practice on climate action and just transition. People and the planet must walk hand in hand. If we don't reduce emissions by more than 50% by 2030, the IPCC report makes it very clear. We cannot stabilise the only home we know if we're not prepared to act with courage and indeed with incisiveness. But this is not something that governments can ignore. We need climate legislation, but we need government procurement. We need tripartite commitment between workers, their unions, employers and their organisations, and governments to get the scale that we need. But it's not just governments and corporations, it's also investors, because climate, just transition, in other words, the E and the S of ESG, have to now be at the forefront of all planning, all investment and all action. We cannot convince people to trust in reforms in every sector that are vital for supporting the stabilisation of the only planet we have, our home, if in fact we don't convince them that they will have jobs, that they'll have social protection, that work will be decent, and that their communities will survive. So this is something corporations can't outsource. We can't see governments simply ignore it and hope that corporations alone will act, and that as trade unions we know that we have to push the discussion, the deliberations and the agreements that make sure that there are just transition measures. That's what trust is all about, and that will get us the scale we need to see us be able to save the planet from, indeed, the ravages that will impact on human beings themselves. Every dollar, every euro, every unit of currency must have environment and just transition, ESG, at its heart. Every corporation must embed climate ambition and indeed jobs, a jobs plan, and the social dialogue that makes it possible for workers to trust that where there is displacement, for older workers their pensions will be secure, for younger workers there will be income support, retraining and redeployment support, and for communities we will see reinvestment. Corporations, investors, governments can't simply walk away from communities. We must have a trust that there's a future for everybody on a sustainable planet. We want corporate action, we want investor action, we want climate laws, but equally we want to see the dialogue, the social dialogue, the agreements that make climate action with just transition possible.